Hi everybody, in today's episode of Ask David, I answer the question, sports lenses, what's the best? Hey David, what's the best sports lens? Kind of a broad question, lots of ways to answer it, lots of good best sports lenses. Picking a lens for sports, and this is the most important. I can't overemphasize how important this is. Get a lens you're familiar with. Don't just go to the store on your way to the game, grab the most expensive telephoto you can find and take pictures. You will fail. Grab a lens that you understand the use and the mechanics of and are familiar with. Sports events, things happen very quickly. Over there, back and forth, really fast. If you're fumbling with zoom or focus or don't know which buttons on the lens are going to control different things, your images will fail. You will miss a lot of shots. So more important than aperture, more important than focal length is knowing how to use your lens well. But let's talk about if you want to go take a picture of a sport and you're not a professional photographer, what are some good options? For sports, I use my Tamron 75 to 300 millimeter lens. This is a Sigma version of the same lens. Both of them are badged Quanta Ray. Very, very sharp lens. And especially on APS-C, 250 to 300 millimeters is really good for sports photography. It gets you pretty close to the action. The only downside to that is that it is a little bit slow for sports. It's an f4 to 5.6 lens. When you start getting on the far end of that, that's really kind of slow. There is a really good Tamron lens and a good Pentax lens. It's a 70 to 200, I believe it is. It's a constant f2.8. That's a pretty good option for a lot of sports as well. But part of what you have to do to decide your sports lens is decide what sport you're going to photograph. If you're going to be outside photographing baseball or softball, especially if it's like your kid's game and you can get really close to the field, you don't need as much throw and you don't need as much speed. It's a slower paced game. So for instance, my 75-300 Quanta Ray works really well for outdoor softball games. All I have to do is put the ISO on the camera up to 800 and my shutter speed is going to hover around a 6,000 to 8,000th most of the time. That's pretty good. But what if you're going to shoot basketball? You're indoors, under artificial lighting, which is good enough for watching the game, but really not good for photographing. Even if it's your kid's basketball game and you can sit in the front row of the bleachers, you're still going to have a hard time. You're going to need a fast lens. If you can be really close to the front, you don't want to go much longer than about a 75-85 millimeter lens. And there's a lot of really good options in the f1.4 to f2 range in that category that aren't too expensive. So there's ways to do that. But let's say you want to photograph a professional sporting event. And one thing to do is check to make sure that the lens you want to bring can be brought into the park, because you don't want to be turned away from the park because your lens is too long. A lot of sports events won't let you bring in a lens longer than 300 millimeters. So assuming that you can bring any lens in, you want to bring in something long and fast, but you also need to know where you're sitting. Sitting in the nosebleed section like I can afford is a whole lot different than if you can sit in a box seat along the first base line. If you're going to be sitting down close, you can get away with something like a 150, 135. The 70 to 300 will do everything you need to for that. If you're way up in the nosebleed section, anything shorter than 400 millimeters is basically going to give you unusable images because the subject's going to be too small. So when choosing a sports lens, get the fastest lens you can most of the time. Get a long lens or the longest focal length that will work for where you're going to be in relationship to the sporting event. But most importantly, get one that you know how to use. You're going to be responding quickly to events. And if you're fumbling with the focus or the zoom or anything like that, you're gonna miss shots. So bring a lens that you're familiar with and can use competently.